today's episode, we're speaking with Suzanne Daymond. Suzanne has been in the recruiting industry for over 25 years and has had an opportunity to work in Europe, the Americas, and Asia in a variety of roles, from recruiter to recruiting manager. Some of the big names that she's worked for include Microsoft, Expedia, and British Airways, just to name a few.
This is the Career Cue, the podcast focused on helping you navigate the signals in your career to keep you growing and moving forward in business and in life. Here's today's host, Stacey Harris.
So welcome to the show, Suzanne. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
Yeah. So before we actually get into the details of the meat of our conversation today about resumes, let's actually just lay it out on the table. Often you hear the term resume or curriculum vitae. So why don't you actually share with our listeners kind of what the difference is between the two?
Okay. Well, a lot of people don't even really know that there's a difference, and they use those two terms as an interchangeable term, really. CV is definitely used a lot more in Europe, and resume is used a lot more in the US. CVs tend to be used much more in the academic world, and it's more of a record of your life's work achievements as you go through your career. And then a resume is very much geared towards job hunting.
Okay, so it almost seems like it could be industry specific, and there's even a niche, like academia or perhaps as a doctor. You'd have more of a CV.
Yeah, or you can probably tell I'm English, and that's what we call it in England. It's send me your CV. I didn't really hear the term resume till I came to the US, so it's geographical as well, I would say.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so now that we've actually got that out and everyone knows high level what the difference is, for the purpose of this conversation, let's just stick with the single term of resume.
Sounds good.
So let's actually talk about basics. Like, how many pages is ideal for a resume?
Well, the answer to that, as with everything, is probably how long's a piece of string. And it really depends on how senior you are. I mean, if you've got 30 years worth of experience in the industry, you're never going to get it all on one page. And personally, I actually hate the one-page rule. I mean, if you really have got 30 years in the industry, you need more than one page to be able to explain, what you've done over the last goodness knows how many years. If you've had 2 years' experience, one page is fine. Whichever way you look at it, we're really not after war and peace. We're after, and we're going to come on to more in-depth details about that in a minute. But definitely, if you've got 30 years' experience, I would say a rule of thumb, maybe 2 to 3 pages. 2 years, one page is fine.
Okay. And so to that, how far back should someone go? If someone does have 30 years of experience, are you, as a recruiter, going to be looking back those 30 years?
Yeah, I mean, again, the answer is how long's a piece of string. It depends. I mean, if you've got 2 to 4 years or 30 years in, when you're early in your career, everything's important. When you're 30 years on, it's not so much. You need to be a little bit more selective, or maybe you changed careers halfway through. And if you do have more than fits on, 2 or 3 pages because you're in the 30-year category, you can always do the piece at the end of your resume where you say my prior work experience includes XYZ in a condensed paragraph, and more details on request.
Okay, yeah, that's a great tip. So what would be the preferred format?
Personally, I think it's important that you make it easy for whoever's looking at your resume to figure out where you've been, how long you were there, and what you do. So chronological all the way, in date order, most recent employer, backwards. Okay.
And so if we're looking at someone maybe mid-career, mm-hmm. and when they're able to condense it down into, say, 2 pages, how much detail or what kind of format should you be doing, especially if you've been with more than one employer or more than even 2 or 3 over the course of, say, a 10-year career? Because I'm just thinking that, it's definitely not the age of you stay with the one company for 30 plus years, you get the gold watch at the end. So what's the best way to approach that type of format when perhaps you've had a number of employers over that course of 10 years?
Right. And are you talking about similar employers?
Yeah.
So if you've got a lot of similar experience,
yep.
okay.
Yeah.
I think that part of building a resume is to really build relevance about the keywords that you're using on your resume, because that's what recruiters look out for. They look out for keywords, key skills, and all the search engines use relevance around those keywords to pop your resume up one step ahead of the person who mentions that word once less than you do. So there is definitely some merit in being somewhat repetitive with those skills, those experiences in your resume, just to build that relevance. But then there's a very fine line between being relevant and repetitive. So you've got to use those words and those key skills as much as you can, so that you pop up one step ahead of the competition. But you've also got to meet that fine line of it actually being relevant, and you're not just saying the word for the sake of saying it. So, if you do have very similar roles, what I would encourage you to do would be to try to bring out different project examples. If you've done two similar things, think about two different project examples that you could include on your resume with the results and how you achieved those results, what the measurements were.
So you just mentioned results. So what are the things that you look for as a recruiter when it comes to reviewing a resume? This is kind of a two-part question, actually. Let's actually start with how long you spend looking at the initial review of a resume, given the volume that you may actually see over the course of a one particular position that you're trying to fill.
Okay. So I spend probably about 10 seconds on a resume, and most recruiters will spend about 10 seconds on a resume. The way I personally do it is I scan from top left to bottom right. I pick out education, I pick out current job title, length of time in roles. That's really just to see if you've been a job hopper. I look at the technical skills. How do they map to what the job description says? Size of the projects. Do you have enough of the relevant experience or keywords on your resume to warrant me picking up the phone or passing on to the hiring manager? And some of the other things I'm really looking for in that resume are succinctness. This is your sales pitch. You are selling yourself. Are you articulate? I'm also looking for action words rather than things like participated in or helped with. I want specific, actionable, measurable things like, I achieved X% growth in, revenue. Well, you've also got to be able to back that up as well. If your revenue was $50 and you increased it 100-fold to $100, that's really not a very exciting prospect versus, 50,000, you increase it to 100,000. That's a lot. That's got a lot more meat and depth to it. But whatever you put on there, you've got to be able to back it up. I also look for kind of like what kind of associations they belong to. Are they affiliated with, IEEE if you're an engineer, or if you're a human resource professional, are you part of SHRM? Things like that. And the one thing that is absolutely my pet peeve is people don't put contact information on their resume, or they put it in a really funky place and it makes you work hard to find it. I don't want to work hard to find anything on anyone's resume. I want it to be there, front and center.
So, to that, for your contact information, should it be at the top?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Front, center, at the top, in bold.
So no mistake of who you are and where you can be found.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. So the other day I opened up a resume that was a fantastic fit for this particular job I was looking for. No phone number, no email. So then I had to take 3 extra steps to go back into our database, open the copy of the resume that was on there, dig out email, phone number. And that's just time that recruiters do not have just because of the volume that they're dealing with.
Yeah. And you don't want to risk not having a recruiter take those extra steps.
Exactly. Because some will just gloss over it and think, you're hard luck. You didn't put your information on there. Moving on to the next.
Okay. So let's talk about the second part to that question would be, are numbers important? Percentages, dollars, obviously in a particular role like a sales role, you want to make sure that you have your revenue targets identified and the percentages in which you increase them and stuff like that. But are those elements that you're also looking at on the page that kind of jump out at you as well?
Yes and no. It depends. It depends on what kind of role you're going for. As you say, if you're going for a sales role, absolutely you should be spelling out your targets, how much you overachieved by, your percentage of revenue, that kind of stuff. There are some roles where it's just really not that important. But you still need to be able to articulate how you measured what you did in some respects. So yes, numbers are For example, if you're a recruiter, how many hires did you typically make a month? What was your interview to offer ratio? How many resumes do you look at before you get one candidate to come in for an interview? That kind of stuff. So you need to be able to back up your numbers, even if you don't put them on your resume, because it doesn't require it. But I would refer that back to, what are they asking for in the job description? If they talk about targets, if they talk about numbers, if they talk about whatever, just pay heed to that and make sure you're including on your resume what they're looking for in the job description. And you may well have 4 or 5 different versions of your resume, which, are differentiated for different pieces of the marketplace.
Potentially based on employer. It may be a sales manager role versus an individual contributor. So to that, when we look at the list of requirements, do you have a recommendation when you're reviewing a job description? Should we be looking at hitting 100% of those requirements, whether they're like mandatory or required, or if they're just kind of nice to have? If we're just looking at a list, say they've got a list of 10. What percentage should you be trying to say or to meet as a part of your actual career experience before you actually consider applying for that job?
Okay. Well, so let's be very clear that the job description is a wish list, right? It's a wish list of what the hiring manager, if they could have their absolute nirvana, this is what I want. The reality is they very, very, very rarely get that. And I think it also depends on what the company is willing to do. How much are they willing to train or mentor that person? What I would definitely tell you is please read the job description. And I know we all like to, put our resume out there just in case they might take a chance on me. They just might. Well, the reality is most people are not going to take a chance on, a pizza delivery boy for a business analyst role. They're just not. So, pretend for a second that you're on the other end of that as a recruiter and think about, the 65 to 70% of your experience that really sticks out, and really focus on that. Tailor your resume with those keywords on the job description to make sure that you stand out for that 65 to 70% of what they're really looking for. That would be my rule of thumb, 65 to 70%.
So if someone's looking at a job description and they shouldn't be intimidated that may not be hitting 100% of those requirements, but we're looking at a ratio of about 65 to 70% to say at the core of that 70%, I know that I've done it and I can prove it. And then there may be elements of my experience that might not have a direct tie into those other 3, but there might be an opportunity for me able to stretch or learn on the job for that.
Yeah. Well, think about it in terms of transferable skills. If you're meeting 65 to 70, what else have you done in your past? That it could be a really great transferable skill.
Yeah. No, that's great. So where are you hanging out as a recruiter?
Again, it depends on what kind of role, what kind of level, but mostly networking. I love LinkedIn. I also get a lot of referrals from old candidates. Even some people I've actually rejected for the job, they give me referrals. And I think that the moral of this story is, be kind to everyone you come across because, they're going to go and tell 20 of their friends about you and give you their referrals. And for me, one of my other sources is, there's nothing better than candidates who come back to you a second time for help to be placed again, or can you give me some advice? I really want to get into this. You helped me first time around. I think I also use all the major job boards, the Monsters, Career Builders, Indeeds. Your company applicant tracking system can be an absolute goldmine. You already know that they're interested because they're in your system already. But my absolute favorite, though, is LinkedIn. Networking your way to the right group of people, and then someone will always know someone who knows someone who knows someone who can do the job that you're trying to fill. So that's my favorite tactic.
And it doesn't take the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon anymore. It's way less than that.
Yeah.
I mean, we love Kevin and we love bacon,
but
you'll often find that you're actually only 2 degrees away from being connected with someone. That's great. So that lends itself into another topic of as far as networking is concerned, and we've actually already spoken, had one episode on LinkedIn and the importance of networking through those tools that are available, and I think that it serves an opportunity to actually dig further into that, and we'd love to be able to continue that conversation with you. So let's actually talk about employer referrals really quick.
Okay.
So what percentage, and obviously this is not scientific, but it's just based on your experience, how important is the employer referral?
I as a recruiter would jump on an employer referral before I would do anything else in my, big old pile of email in my inbox. If someone refers someone to me, they've either usually worked with them or they know someone that's worked with them and they think that they're going to be a really good skill set match for that particular job because they've either worked in the group or they know what it takes. Incredibly important. I would say incredibly important. And that also kind of leads on to what we were going to be talking about in terms of black holes. How do you not fall into the black hole of, the online job application? Most companies will require that you apply online. They want to know who you are and your experience, but it's all really about who you know out there. Don't be afraid to use your connections. Get an already internal employee to refer you. Don't be afraid to use your network for help. Go ahead and reply online, but then look in your network, look on LinkedIn, look around in your pool of people that you know. Find out how you can use them to get your name or your resume into the right hands inside the company. Because hands down, I can tell you that you'll be looked at way quicker than if you just apply online without following anything up.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. So we're actually going to take a really quick break. And when we come back, we're actually going to talk about some of the mistakes the kind of typical mistakes that people make when they're building a resume. So stay tuned and we'll be back in a minute.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to check out the show notes at thecareerq.com, where you can also subscribe to the podcast and sign up for our newsletter.
Welcome back to the Career Q. Today we're speaking with Suzanne Daymond, and she's taking us through the steps on tips and tricks of building out a great resume. So let's talk about there's a few mistakes that people can make in their resume, but let's just hit the top 3 that you often see.
Okay. One of the things I often see is either your resume is too long, it could be 10, 20 pages. I've seen that. And you're like, okay, I'm going to fall asleep now. Or it's too short. There's definitely this fine balance, as I mentioned earlier. The other thing I can't tell you, just such a pet peeve of mine, spelling mistakes. In this day and age, there is no excuse with all the spell check tools, everything. I understand, there are a lot of folks where English is their second language, so grammatically it might not read perfectly, but spelling mistakes, everyone can spell check. Press the little button. Do it. Okay. Another thing that I've seen a couple of times is people telling lies about their education. Every single company pretty much these days does a background check, and I've actually had to rescind offers because people have not cleared the background check, because when they've gone to verify education, it turns out they actually don't have that degree they talked about. So please, just make sure you tell the truth. If you didn't complete your degree, just put it on there. Just put it on your resume so it's very clear.
But you want to be authentic?
Yeah, you got to be truthful.
Yep.
Truthful is
because it will come out in the end.
It'll come and bite you in the end if you're not truthful.
Yep.
And then I think that that one of the biggest mistakes that people made is they're not tailoring their resume to the job. It's too generic, and you may well have 4 or 5 different versions of your resume for different kinds of jobs, and you've got to use them. Make sure that you're getting those keywords into your resumes from the job description to make sure that you're giving yourself the best chance of being picked out in that 10-second scan that the recruiter does.
So making sure that in reviewing the job description, you're pulling out the elements that are important to the hiring manager and making sure that your resume represents that and that it's easily called out. That's great. So before we actually round things out, we actually want to make sure that our listeners can walk away from today's conversation and have some quick call to actions that they can act on. So what are some of the takeaways that you'd like to share with them today?
Yeah, I think my top 3 takeaways are read the job description. Can't stress that enough. And, if you don't have that 60 to plus %, match to what they're asking for, please consider not doing it. You're just going to then be noise in the system. Think about how much time that recruiter has spent on, doing stuff that's not of value to finding the right person for the job. So, really try hard to make sure you do match at least 60% of what they're looking for before you put your name in the hat.
Well, and I think that speaks to the fact that it's important for each candidate to go ahead and apply for jobs that they are going to be reviewed at. Because if you're spending time submitting an application or doing your resume or developing a cover letter, you need to make sure that the effort that you're putting into that is you've got a high chance of it being reviewed at some level. If you are just applying to jobs to get the volume in there, then you're actually doing yourself a disservice by removing that opportunity for you to spend more time on a job that's more valuable and closer to what you want to do.
Yeah. And I would definitely advocate, don't keep throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. Try and be as tailored as you can in your approach to what really does match your skill set.
Yeah.
Oh, and the second thing is just really be very relevant and specific. And then I think the last takeaway I would say is don't be afraid to use your network.
So speaking of your network, is there an opportunity for you to be able to leverage your network to perhaps look at your resume or take a look and give you some feedback, keeping you honest, right? For a fresh set of eyes to look at your resume and go, really, Steve, you increased it by 1,000%? Like, what does that say? Or are you sure it was 1,000%?
Yeah, there's absolute value in having a second set of eyes. And, if you're lucky enough to know a fabulous recruiter, then get them to look at it. But, even get your dad, your mom, your cousin, one of your friends to look at it and say, well, what does that mean? Or I don't understand what you're saying there. It's very valuable.
Yeah, because you can be in the weeds in your head. Yeah. And good for you to just pop back up and see what someone else might think. That's great. So we're going to take one more quick break, and when we come back, we're going to just chat about some lighthearted questions that we ask each guest. So we're looking forward to your answers, Suzanne, and then we'll wrap things up for the show.
Job search doesn't have to be painful. Plum coaches have more than 20 years of recruiting experience and know how people are hired. Let the experts at Plum Coaching and Consulting partner with you on a modern job search. Visit plumseattle.com today. So
this is a kind of a fun segment that we like to do with each guest. So Suzanne, let's talk about your first job and what were some of the fundamentals that you took away from that you may be actually still using today.
So I'm thinking probably with a lot of other people, I probably don't want to tell you about my very first job in the dishwasher section of a restaurant on a Saturday for 4 hours. One of my first professional jobs was with an employment agency. And at the time, we thought the manager was just a tyrant. All of us hated her, just hated her, thought that she was such a witch. But the one thing that sticks in my brain that she taught me, and she stressed every time she walked past your desk, she's like, multitask. While you're holding on the phone, be doing something else. While you're holding on the phone, doing this. While you're waiting in that line, be thinking about something else. And, there's definitely, advocates for not multitasking because you do a lot of things badly. But there are certain aspects of your job that you absolutely could take the opportunity to multitask in more than we do. And I use that to this day. I mean, if I'm holding on the phone for something, or you're waiting in a line, I'm like doing 5 other things at the same time, and that's really stood me in very good stead as I've gone through my professional career.
Yeah, that's great. So something that you, as you were entering your career, you thought perhaps wasn't something that you were. It was a value that she was trying to teach you guys that you couldn't see the value in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Would you tell her that today?
Oh, I would be like, thank God you told me that. Seriously.
And I didn't like you. But,
I didn't like you at the time. I thought you were a witch, but now I love you for it. And I think the other thing, one of the best pieces of advice I ever got when I first started in one particular job, someone said to me, don't try to be of immediate value. And I thought, well, that's stupid. That's why they've hired me. Of course I want to be of immediate value. And I was really like, that's such a stupid piece of advice. But, now looking back 20 years later, I'm like, that was so smart. Because, you've got to, in some respects, you've got to take the time to adjust to your surroundings. You've got to play the newbie card. You've got to ask all the stupid questions that 3 months down the line or 6 months down the line, when you ask someone a really stupid question, they're going to be, what the heck were we thinking in hiring that person? You're far better off under-promising and over-delivering than trying to be of immediate value.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh. So was it that same woman or was that someone
No,
different?
this was someone different.
Okay. So have you actually read War and Peace?
No, I haven't.
So maybe that's maybe it's a recommendation or not.
Probably not. No.
But so what have you read or watched or even listened to recently that you'd actually recommend to our listeners?
So this is actually a little bit kind of like work related because you probably don't want to know about the trash I read.
Oh, but do we?
I'm actually reading the new Lee Child novel. Very good.
Good.
Spent 4 hours on the plane yesterday reading that.
Nice.
Very good. But no, one of the things I actually went to recently was some inclusive hiring training. And it was really talking about how we as a society are really not very inclusive in our language that we're using when we're talking about job descriptions, what we're looking for. And the bottom line to that was, that so many people are turned off and they feel very unconfident. Is that a word? Non-confident, not confident, unconfident, I don't know, whatever the word is. Anyway, about applying for that particular job because there are words and phrases in there that they just think, oh, that doesn't talk to me. That doesn't talk about me and my skill set. And so they just don't apply. And so the takeaway from that training session was, really be careful about the kind of words you're using to describe the skill sets that you want and the attributes that you want in your job description to make sure that they are more inclusive.
So, and from a candidate perspective, it's don't be intimidated.
Yes.
Or take the time to actually try and see what they're trying to ultimately say.
Yeah.
Even if it's using a word that may not speak directly to you. Yeah.
And, that also speaks to all of us who are employers, right? I mean, we all do an absolute hideous job of writing job descriptions. It's like one of those things that's like, it just gets in the way of you getting your job open and getting a pool of candidates. You just want it off your desk. You just want to do it. Just take that extra 5 minutes. Just think about the way that you're phrasing things is the takeaway there.
And that extra 5 seconds might mean, an even better candidate to fill
absolutely.
that spot. Because we all know that training or onboarding new employees is expensive.
Oh, yeah.
And if you've got high turnover, you're going to be spending more money than you would had you to actually taken the time up front.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so you're sitting down on a Saturday afternoon and you're having a cup of tea. Mm-hmm. And you're actually having a cup of tea with your 90-year-old self. So what would 90-year-old Suzanne say to you today?
I think that there's 2 or 3 things I'd definitely say to myself, one of which is always treat people kindly because it always pays off to treat people kindly. You never know when you're going to bump into them, when you might need their help. Just treat people kindly. It doesn't cost you anything to be kind.
Or when they're going to be your manager?
Yeah, potentially, exactly. I think the second thing I would say to myself is, try harder than you need to. Always try harder than you need to, rather than just get by when you're in school. I totally was that kid that I did just enough to scrape by, and I'm like, oh my God, I could have been so much more than I am had I just tried a little bit harder. And then I think the other thing that I would tell myself is, don't always do the easy thing. Don't always take the easy path because sometimes the rewards for doing the thing that's harder are way better.
Okay, so 90-year-old you would give you, and you're obviously wanting to take that advice and move on through the rest of your career and personal life with that. That's awesome. That was great, Suzanne. Thanks so much for sharing a little bit more about you and especially when it comes to the expertise that you have that candidates can take away today and apply to their resume and job applications and job searches in the future. Where can people find you?
Happy to connect with anybody on LinkedIn.
That's great. So we'll actually have a link to Suzanne's profile on LinkedIn in the show notes. And we'll be back with another episode later this week. But in the meantime, go ahead and check us out at thecareerq.com.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Be sure to head on over to thecareerq.com where you can get more information, show notes, and related articles to today's topic. Also, if you like what you're hearing, head on over to iTunes, subscribe to the podcast, and make sure you leave us a rating and a review. We'd love to hear your feedback. Thanks again.